She thought she had found peace in her son's mansion after years of struggle and sacrifice, but behind those walls there was only pain. The elderly woman was treated like a servant by her son's cruel wife. One day, after yet another humiliation, she raised her voice, and the truth came out in front of everyone. If this story grabs you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The gardens of the Upper East Side mansion were meticulously cared for. Red roses bloomed along the high wall that separated the imposing property from the rest of the world. Majestic oak trees lined the main entrance, and the wrought-iron electronic gate reflected the golden light of the New York afternoon. To anyone passing by on the tree-lined street, it was just another luxury residence among many in the affluent Manhattan neighborhood. But for Eleanor, that house represented something very different from what it appeared to be. The white-haired woman, her hair tied in a simple bun, watched the garden from the window of the small room she occupied at the back of the house. It wasn't a guest room, although that's how Patricia, her daughter-in-law, presented it to visitors. It was a cramped space with a twin bed, an old wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto the back wall. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with the laundry area. Eleanor didn't complain. After all, it was her son's house, and after a lifetime of sacrifice, living there was supposed to be her well-deserved rest. Supposed to be. Eleanor's memory constantly returned to the hard times. She had raised Robert alone since he was just 3 years old. Her husband had passed away far too soon, leaving her with a young child and debts that seemed impossible to pay. Eleanor worked as a seamstress during the day and cleaned houses at night. She slept little, ate even less. All so that her boy could have clean clothes, a new notebook at the start of the school year, a plate of hot food on the table. She remembered the nights she sewed until dawn, her fingers sore from needle pricks, her eyes burning with exhaustion. But when she saw Robert sleeping peacefully in the small rented room where they lived, it all made sense. The boy was always a good student. Eleanor saved every penny to pay for school supplies, bus fare, and uniforms. When Robert got into a top engineering program, she cried for 3 days straight, not from sadness, but from pure, uncontrollable joy. Her son would be an engineer. Her son would have a different life than hers. Her son wouldn't go hungry, wouldn't wake up at 5 in the morning to take 3 subway trains to get to work, wouldn't have to choose between buying medicine or food. And Robert lived up to every expectation. He graduated with honors, landed an excellent job at a multinational corporation, and quickly climbed the corporate ladder. At 35, he was a manager at one of the largest construction firms in New York. He bought that Upper East Side mansion at 40, fulfilling his dream of giving his mother a comfortable life. Eleanor still remembered the day he showed up at the small apartment where she still lived in the Bronx and emotionally announced that he had bought a big house and she was going to live with him. On that day, Eleanor believed that all her sacrifices had finally been worth it. But then came Patricia. Robert met Patricia 3 years after buying the house. She was a lawyer, elegant, always impeccable. She wore tailored suits, designer shoes, and French perfume. Her straightened blonde hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. When she smiled, she revealed perfectly white, straight teeth. Patricia came from an old-money New York family, frequented the right places, and knew the right people. She was everything Robert imagined a successful man should have by his side. Eleanor noticed from their very first meeting that Patricia looked at her differently. It wasn't outright hostility, but something subtle, almost imperceptible, a gaze that lasted half a second too long, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a phrase that was too polite, too cold. But Eleanor kept her impressions to herself. Robert was in love, and she didn't want to be the mother who stood in the way of her son's happiness. The wedding was lavish. 300 guests at the Metropolitan Club, a dress imported from Italy, white decorations with roses, orchids, and crystals. Eleanor wore a simple pink dress she had bought at a department store. She sat in the front row and cried as she watched her son, so happy. Patricia barely looked at her during the reception, but that was okay. It was her day, Eleanor thought. Brides are always nervous. In the first few months after the wedding, everything seemed normal. Patricia was polite, courteous, and kept a respectful distance. Eleanor helped with the household chores because it was her habit. She had always worked, always been active. Staying still wasn't in her nature. She did her own laundry, tidied her room, and helped Brenda, the housekeeper, in the kitchen. Small contributions, nothing major. But slowly the requests began. First it was something simple. Patricia asked if Eleanor could water the garden plants, while the gardener was on vacation. Of course, Eleanor replied. Then it was folding the towels from the laundry, then cleaning the crystal cabinet in the dining room, then organizing Patricia's walk-in closet, then washing Robert's car. The requests were always made with a polite smile, but there was something in Patricia's voice that didn't allow for refusal. And Eleanor, who had spent her life serving, didn't know how to say no. Brenda, the housekeeper who had worked at the house for 5 years, watched everything in silence. She was a slim, black woman in her early 50s with observant eyes that missed no detail. Brenda liked Eleanor. The old woman was kind, always said thank you and spoke respectfully. When Brenda made coffee in the morning, Eleanor insisted on helping her. The two shared life stories, talked about their children, about the difficulties of raising a family. Brenda had 3 grown children and understood the motherly love Eleanor felt for Robert. It was Brenda who first noticed the change in Patricia's tone. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the wedding. Robert had left early for an important meeting. Eleanor was in the kitchen having coffee when Patricia appeared, still in her robe, her hair in a loose ponytail. She looked at Eleanor with an expression that was no longer courteous. "Eleanor, I need you to wash the master bathroom today. There are spots on the shower glass." The tone wasn't a request. It was an order. Eleanor blinked, surprised, but smiled. "Of course, dear. I'll get to it after my coffee." Patricia didn't say thank you. She just turned and left the kitchen. Brenda, who was washing dishes at the sink, exchanged a look with Eleanor. But neither of them said anything. In the following days, the orders increased. Patricia no longer asked, she just dictated, and her tone of voice grew colder, sharper. Eleanor started waking up earlier to finish the tasks before Robert left for work. She didn't want him to notice. She didn't want to worry him. Robert, for his part, was increasingly absent. His position at the construction firm required constant travel to other cities, meetings that stretched late into the night. He left early, came home late. On weekends, he locked himself in his office to review projects and reports. Patricia complained about her husband's absence, but at the same time, she seemed pleased. When Robert wasn't home, she had total control, and Eleanor was getting tired. The hands that once sewed wedding dresses and school uniforms now ached from scrubbing marble floors. The knees, marked by years of hard work, creaked when she knelt to clean the baseboards. Her back protested as she carried heavy buckets of water and cleaning products. Eleanor was 72. Her body was no longer the same as when she was raising Robert alone. But she didn't complain. She swallowed the pain with the same resignation she swallowed Patricia's harsh words. One Thursday afternoon, Eleanor was washing Robert's car in the garage. The March sun beat down on New York with suffocating heat. Eleanor felt dizzy, but she kept scrubbing the silver paint of the imported sedan. Patricia watched from the porch, a glass of orange juice in her hand, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "You missed a spot on the rear right wheel. There's still soap on it." Eleanor nodded, too tired to reply. She crouched down with difficulty and started again. The sun beat directly on her stooped back, her blouse sticking to her sweaty body. When she finally finished, she slowly climbed the steps to the kitchen. Brenda was waiting for her with a glass of ice water. "You need to rest, Eleanor. This heat is no joke." Eleanor smiled weakly, but accepted the water. She drank it in long gulps, feeling the cold liquid soothe her dry throat. "I'm fine, Brenda. It's just the heat." Brenda didn't press, but she decided right then that she had to do something. When Patricia left for the salon that afternoon, Brenda took out the old cell phone she kept in her apron pocket and started recording. She didn't know exactly what she would do with the recordings, but she felt she needed proof. Someday, perhaps, they would be necessary. Life in the Upper East Side mansion continued its silent, oppressive routine. Robert remained absent, immersed in his work. Patricia remained elegant on the surface and cruel in the shadows. Eleanor remained silent, protecting her son from a truth he wasn't ready to see. But there were other witnesses. Mr. Miller, the elderly neighbor who lived next door, used to water his plants in the late afternoon. From his yard he could see part of the backyard of Robert's mansion. Mr. Miller was 80, a widower, and lived alone with a housekeeper who came 3 times a week. He spent his days reading the newspaper, tending to his orchids, and observing the neighborhood. He wasn't nosy, but he was observant. And Mr. Miller started noticing strange things. He saw Eleanor working in the garden under the scorching sun, while Patricia sunbathed on a lounge chair with a book in her hands. He saw Eleanor carrying heavy trash bags to the curb, while Patricia chatted on the phone without helping. He saw Eleanor stooped, tired, always moving. One day Mr. Miller called out to Eleanor as she was, watering the plants near the wall that divided their properties. "Good afternoon, Eleanor. How are you doing?" Eleanor looked up, surprised. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I'm fine, thank God." "You're working very hard, aren't you? Be careful not to overdo it in this heat." Eleanor waved her hand, downplaying his concern. "Oh, it's nothing. Just helping out a bit around here." Mr. Miller frowned, but didn't insist. However, from that day on he paid closer attention, and what he saw in the following days deeply disturbed him. This wasn't a woman helping out of her own free will. This was a woman being exploited. Inside the house, another silent observer was recording everything. Lucas, Robert, and Patricia's 15-year-old son, was a quiet, studious teenager who spent most of his time in his room playing video games or studying for the upcoming SATs. Lucas loved his grandmother. When he was a child, before his parents were married, he would spend entire afternoons listening to the stories Eleanor told about his father's childhood. She spoke with pride about how Robert studied late, how determined he was, how he never gave up even when everything seemed impossible. But in recent months, Lucas sensed that something was wrong. He heard the arguments. They weren't shouts, because Patricia was too smart to shout. But Lucas heard the cold, cutting tone his mother used with his grandmother when his father wasn't around. He heard the orders disguised as requests. He heard Eleanor's tired sighs. One day, Lucas went downstairs to get some water from the kitchen and found his grandmother sitting at the table, her hands trembling as she drank a cup of tea. She looked exhausted, her face thinner than he remembered. "Grandma, are you okay?" Eleanor looked up and forced a smile. "I'm fine, my angel. Just a little tired." Lucas sat down next to her and held her hand. "You're working too much. Why don't you rest?" Eleanor squeezed her grandson's hand affectionately. "Don't you worry about me, Lucas. I'm fine, it's just old age, you know." But Lucas knew it wasn't just old age, and at that moment, he made a decision. He started carrying his cell phone with him at all times, ready to record anything that could serve as proof of what was happening. Lucas didn't know exactly what he would do with the recordings, but he felt that one day they would be important. The weeks passed and the situation gradually worsened, almost imperceptibly to anyone not paying attention. But Eleanor felt it. She felt it in her aching body, in her increasingly rough hands, in her eyes that burned with fatigue every night. She woke up at 5 in the morning and went to bed after midnight. In between, it was an endless succession of chores. Robert remained oblivious. When he was home, Patricia reverted to being the attentive, elegant wife. She served dinner with a smile, asked about his work, and talked about their social commitments for the week. Eleanor ate in silence, responding only when directly asked. Robert, tired from his long workdays, barely noticed his mother. He thought she was fine. He thought she was finally resting after a lifetime of struggle. If only he knew. One Friday night, Robert came home early. He had managed to move up a meeting and decided to surprise his family. Upon entering the house, he found Patricia in the living room, impeccable as always, watching a series on the large-screen TV. "Hi, honey, what a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting you so soon." Robert kissed his wife and sat down next to her. "Where's my mom?" Patricia maintained her smile. "Oh, she went to bed early, said she was tired." Robert frowned. "She's always tired lately, isn't she? I guess it's just her age." Patricia nodded, feigning concern. "I know, I've noticed it too. Maybe we should take her to a doctor. Sometimes she gets a little confused, you know, forgets things." It was the first seed. Patricia was starting to build a narrative. preparing the ground for what she planned to do. If she could convince Robert that his mother was losing her mental faculties, it would be easier to get her out of the house. A nursing home, a place far away, discreet, where no one would ask questions. Robert, however, didn't see the manipulation. He just nodded, concerned. Really? I hadn't noticed. I'll talk to her tomorrow. But the next day, Robert was called to handle an emergency at a construction site and left early. The conversation with his mother was postponed, and later never came. Eleanor, in her small room at the back, heard Robert's footsteps fading away. She knew he had left without speaking. To her, she didn't blame him. Robert worked so hard, was so dedicated. He deserved this comfortable life, this beautiful house, this elegant wife. Eleanor didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be a source of worry. So she remained silent. She continued to serve. She continued to swallow the pain. But the silent witnesses remained vigilant. Brenda recorded whenever she could. Mr. Miller watched from his yard next door. Lucas recorded scenes with his phone hidden among his books. They all felt that something needed to be done, but no one knew exactly how or when to act. The pressure was building, and Eleanor, without realizing it, was reaching her breaking point. On a Monday morning, Patricia woke up in a bad mood. She had argued with a colleague the day before and needed to vent her frustration on someone. Eleanor was the perfect target. Always silent, always obedient, always available. "Eleanor, I need you to clean the pool bathroom. It's disgusting." The tone was harsher than usual. Eleanor, who was finishing tidying the kitchen after breakfast, nodded in silence. She went to get the cleaning supplies and walked to the pool area at the back of the house. The cabana bathroom was small, but Patricia demanded it be cleaned with the meticulousness of a surgical suite. Eleanor knelt on the cold floor and began to scrub. Her knees protested immediately, but she ignored the pain. She always did. She was so used to living with pain that it had become part of her routine, like breathing or blinking. As she worked, she thought about her life. She thought of Robert as a little boy, running through the cramped apartment where they lived, laughing as she chased him, pretending to be mad. She thought of the nights he would hug her and say that when he grew up, he would buy a big house for her. She thought about how he had kept his promise. The house was big. It was beautiful. But Eleanor had never felt so imprisoned. After finishing the cleaning, Eleanor tried to stand up. Her legs trembled, her knees refused to support her weight. She leaned on the sink and took a deep breath, waiting for her body to obey. When she finally managed to stand, she felt a strong wave of dizziness. The world spun for a moment. Eleanor closed. Her eyes gripped the sink tighter and waited for the feeling to pass. It was at that moment that Brenda walked past the bathroom door and saw the scene. Eleanor, pale, trembling, her fingers white from gripping the edge of the sink. Brenda dropped the broom she was carrying and rushed to support her. "Eleanor, are you okay? Come, sit down." Brenda helped Eleanor sit on the edge of the bathtub. She ran to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water and a piece of bread. She made Eleanor eat, drink. She waited until the color returned to her wrinkled face. "You can't go on like this, Eleanor. Your body is crying out for help." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Brenda. It was just a little dizzy spell." But Brenda wasn't convinced. That night, when she got home, she called her daughter and vented. She told her about Eleanor, about the humiliations, about the extreme exhaustion. Brenda's daughter, outraged, suggested she see a lawyer, that she report it. But Brenda knew it wasn't that simple. Eleanor had to be ready to take the first step, and for now she was still trapped in the silence that both protected and destroyed her. The days continued in the same pattern. Sun up, sun down, chores piling up, a body begging for rest that never came. Eleanor woke up, worked, slept, and in between all that, silence. The silence that burned inside, that corroded her soul, that weighed more than any bucket of water or mop. That same night something happened that planted another seed of tension in the already charged atmosphere of the mansion. Robert came home around 9 o'clock, carrying a briefcase full of documents. Patricia greeted him with a kiss on the cheek and a perfect smile. Eleanor was in the kitchen, finishing the dishes from the dinner she herself had prepared. Robert went into the kitchen looking for water and found his mother there, her hands submerged in dish soap suds. "Mum, you don't have to do that. Brenda can wash them in the morning." Eleanor turned and smiled at her son. "Oh, honey, it's no trouble at all. I'm almost done." Robert watched his mother for a moment. She seemed smaller than he remembered, more stooped, more tired. But before he could say anything, Patricia appeared at the kitchen door. "Honey, let Eleanor do her thing. She likes to feel useful, don't you, mother-in-law?" The tone was sweet, but there was something sharp hidden in the words. Eleanor just nodded, turning back to the sink. Robert took a bottle of water from the fridge and left with Patricia. When their footsteps faded down the hall, Eleanor leaned her hands on the edge of the sink and took a deep breath. The tears came without warning, silent, streaming down her wrinkled face and falling into the soapy water. She cried for the son who couldn't see. She cried for herself. She cried for the life she had imagined and the reality she was living. But she quickly wiped her face with her apron, finished the dishes, and went to her small room at the back. She couldn't let Robert see her cry. He had too many worries. He worked so hard. He deserved to be happy. In the early hours of that same night, Eleanor woke up with sharp pains in her back. She tried to move in the narrow bed, but every movement was agony. The back that had carried Robert in her arms as a baby, that had carried bags of laundry for years, that had bent over sewing machines and mops, was finally screaming. Eleanor got up with difficulty and walked to the small bathroom down the hall. She opened the medicine cabinet and found an old bottle of painkillers she had bought months ago. She took 2 pills and went back to bed hoping the pain would subside. It didn't. The next morning, Eleanor woke up still feeling her back throb, but she got up anyway. There was work to do. There was always work to do. She put on her usual simple clothes, tied back her white hair, and left her room. The house was still quiet. Robert had already left for an early meeting. Patricia was still asleep. Eleanor made coffee, tidied the kitchen, went to the laundry room, and started sorting clothes. It was Tuesday, the day to wash the bed linens. Patricia demanded the sheets be changed twice a week. Eleanor carried the heavy basket to the laundry room. Every movement of her back was a sharp pang of pain, but she gritted her teeth and continued. It was Brenda who found her half an hour later, sitting on the laundry room floor, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Eleanor, what happened?" Eleanor tried to smile, but the smile came out twisted with pain. "It's just my back, Brenda. It'll pass." Brenda helped the old woman up and took her to the kitchen. She sat her in a chair, made a strong cup of tea, and stood there, watching Eleanor drink it slowly. It was a moment of care in the midst of chaos, a moment of humanity in the midst of cruelty. "You need to see a doctor. This isn't normal." Eleanor shook her head. "No need. It's just a little fatigue. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. And in the following days, Eleanor continued to work through the pain. She continued to carry buckets, scrub floors, wash clothes, and clean bathrooms, because that's what was expected of her, and Eleanor had spent her entire life doing what was expected of her. One Thursday afternoon, Patricia was in the second-floor office working from home. Robert was traveling to Stamford, where the construction company had a large project underway. Lucas was at school. The house was quiet, with only the distant sound of the washing machine. Patricia came downstairs and found Eleanor cleaning the mirrors in the living room. The old woman was on a small step-ladder, wiping the high parts of the mirrors. "Be careful you don't fall from there, Eleanor." The tone was one of false concern. Eleanor turned and almost lost her balance. She held onto the ladder, her heart racing. "I'm being careful, Patricia." Patricia crossed her arms and watched her mother-in-law with that look Eleanor knew well. The look that assessed, that judged, that diminished. "You know, Eleanor, I've noticed you've been a bit forgetful lately. Yesterday you left the faucet in the utility room dripping. The day before you forgot to turn off the hallway light. Is everything okay with you? Maybe it's time to see a doctor. These memory things at your age are concerning." Eleanor slowly climbed down from the ladder, holding the cleaning cloth in her hand. She looked at her daughter-in-law and felt something heavy settle in her chest. She knew exactly what Patricia was doing. She was building a narrative. She was preparing the ground for something. And Eleanor, even tired, even in pain, was no fool. My memory is just fine, Patricia, and I'll continue to take care of this house as long as I can. Patricia raised an eyebrow, surprised by the firmness in her mother-in-law's voice, but she quickly composed herself and smiled coldly. Of course, Eleanor. I'm just concerned about you. And she went back upstairs, leaving Eleanor alone in the living room. That evening, Brenda stayed late because Patricia had asked her to prepare a special dinner for some friends who were coming over. While she was cooking, Brenda took a moment when she was alone in the kitchen with Eleanor to ask a question she had been holding on to for days. Eleanor, can I ask you something? Eleanor, who was peeling potatoes, looked at Brenda. Of course, dear. Why do you put up with all this? Why don't you tell Robert what's happening? Eleanor stopped peeling the potatoes. She looked at her own hands, marked by work, by age, by life, and she answered in a low but firm voice, Because he's my son, Brenda, and a son doesn't need to know his mother is suffering. It was enough that he suffered as a child, when we had nothing. Now he has everything. He has this beautiful house, a good job, a wife. I won't be the mother who destroys her. Son's marriage. I won't be the mother who brings problems. He deserves to be happy. Brenda felt her eyes sting. But what about your happiness? Doesn't that matter? Eleanor smiled sadly. A mother's happiness is seeing her son well. That has always been enough for me. Brenda said no more. But that night when she got home, she put her phone in a safe place. The recordings she had made were there, and she knew that one day, perhaps soon, they would be needed. The days dragged on, and the oppressive routine continued. Eleanor woke up early, worked all day, slept late. Patricia remained elegant, cold, and calculating. Robert remained absent, lost between meetings, construction sites, and trips, and the silent witnesses continued to record, observe, and wait for the right moment. But Eleanor was changing. Slowly, something inside her was transforming. Resignation was giving way to a dull, contained anger. The protective silence was beginning to weigh too heavily, and without clearly realizing it, Eleanor was approaching a breaking point. On a Monday morning, 2 weeks after her conversation with Brenda, a small thing happened that was like a spark in a powder keg. Eleanor was tidying Lucas's room, changing the bed sheets as she did every Monday. She found a notebook under the bed, and as she picked it up to put it on the desk, some pages fell out. They were drawings. Lucas drew well, and these drawings showed scenes from the house. Eleanor recognized the garden, the pool, the living room, but one drawing in particular made her stop. It was her. Eleanor saw herself drawn, stooped, carrying a bucket. Lucas's lines were expressive, and on the drawn face of his grandmother, there was a sadness that Eleanor never knew was so visible. Below the drawing, Lucas had written in small letters a sentence that pierced Eleanor's heart like an arrow. I wish Grandma would smile like she used to. Eleanor sat on Lucas's bed and held the drawing with both hands. The tears came hard, uncontrollable. She cried there, alone in her grandson's room, realizing that her silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was just spreading pain. Lucas saw. Lucas knew. And Lucas was suffering with her. At that moment, something inside Eleanor began to crack. A small but significant fissure. The armor of silence began to give way. And although she didn't know it yet, that fissure would soon become a crack, and the crack would become a break. And when the break finally happened, the truth would come flooding out like a dam bursting after years of holding back. Eleanor put the drawing in her apron pocket. She finished tidying Lucas's room, but now with a different weight in her chest. It was no longer just the weight of pain. It was the weight of a decision that was beginning to form, still timid, still scared, but present. The silence was starting to hurt more than the truth, and Eleanor, without knowing it, was preparing to do the hardest thing a mother can do, put her own dignity above the blind protection of her son. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. For now, Eleanor remained silent. She continued to serve. She continued to shrink. However, the silent witnesses were more attentive than ever. Brenda with her recordings, Mr. Miller with his observations, Lucas with his videos and drawings, all waiting. not knowing that the right moment would soon arrive. And when it did, nothing in that Upper East Side mansion would ever be the same. The weeks following the moment Eleanor found Lucas's drawing were marked by a silent but profound transformation. The fissure that had opened in the old woman's heart didn't disappear. On the contrary, it grew slowly, fed by each new humiliation, each new look of contempt, each new order disguised as a request. But Patricia was also changing her strategy. She had realized that Eleanor, despite everything, still had her grandson's loyalty and Brenda's respect. That was a problem. If she wanted to get rid of her mother-in-law for good, she needed to do more than just exploit the old woman. She needed to destroy her credibility. She needed to make everyone, including Robert, believe that Eleanor was losing her mind. And that's exactly what Patricia started to do. On a Wednesday afternoon, Patricia invited 2 friends over for tea. They were women from New York's high society, elegant, always well-dressed, with strong opinions on everything and everyone. Patricia received them in the living room overlooking the garden, serving French petit four and imported tea in porcelain cups. The conversation flowed between trivial topics when Patricia calculatingly let a confidence slip. "Girls, I need to vent to you. I'm so worried about my mother-in-law." The 2 friends leaned forward, eager for details. Nothing interested that social circle more than other people's problems disguised as genuine concern. "What's going on, dear?" Patricia sighed dramatically, placing her teacup back on the saucer with a delicate clink. "You know Eleanor has been living with us since Robert and I got married. Everything was fine at first, but lately I've noticed strange things. She forgets where she puts things, repeats the same stories over and over. Sometimes she seems confused. Just yesterday she left the gas on in the kitchen. Luckily Brenda noticed before anything serious happened." It was a lie. None of that had happened, but Patricia's friends had no way of knowing. "Oh my, how worrying. And does Robert know?" Patricia shook her head with rehearsed sadness. "He's so busy with work he's barely home. I don't want to worry him, but I think I'll have to have a serious talk with him soon. Maybe it's time to find a suitable place for her, you know? A place where she can have professional care, doctors, nurses. Here at home, I'm afraid she'll hurt herself." The friends readily agreed. "Of course, it's for the best. You're absolutely right to think about that. There are wonderful assisted living facilities with all the right support. It's even more humane than leaving her here without proper care." Patricia smiled, satisfied. The seed was planted. In a few days, the story that her mother-in-law was having mental problems would be spread throughout their social circle, and when Robert finally heard the rumors from other people, it would be easier to convince him. What Patricia didn't know was that Brenda was in the kitchen, on the other side of the wall separating the 2 rooms, and she was hearing every word. Brenda stood motionless, her heart tight with anger and indignation. When Patricia's friends left, she found Eleanor and told her everything. Eleanor listened in silence, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped in her lap. When Brenda finished speaking, the old woman looked up and said with a firm voice that surprised even herself, "She's trying to get me out of here, Brenda. She's building a lie to justify my departure." Brenda nodded, furious. "Exactly. But we're not going to let her, Eleanor. You're not crazy. You're exhausted, exploited, and humiliated, and this has to stop." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. Part of her wanted to remain silent, to continue protecting Robert from the truth. But another part, that fissure that had opened in her heart, cried out for justice. That night, when Robert came home, Patricia was waiting for him with a glass of whiskey and a worried smile. "Honey, I need to talk to you about your mother." Robert took the glass, tired, and sat on the sofa. "What's wrong?" Patricia sat next to him, placing her hand on his with studied gentleness. "I've noticed some strange behaviors. She's been forgetful, confused. Just today she left the faucet on and the bathroom almost flooded. I'm worried. I think she needs medical attention." Robert frowned. "Really? I haven't noticed any of that." Patricia squeezed his hand with false affection. "It's because you work so much, dear. You're always traveling. But I'm here all day, and I've seen it. Maybe it's time to see a neurologist. These things at her age can be signs of something more serious. Robert took a sip of his whiskey, thoughtful. I'll talk to her this weekend, see how she's doing. But the weekend came and Robert was called to handle an emergency at a construction site in the Hamptons. He left on Friday morning and only returned on Sunday night. When he arrived, exhausted, all he wanted was to sleep. The conversation with his mother was postponed once again. Meanwhile, Patricia intensified her silent campaign. She commented to the manicurist who came to the house about her forgetful mother-in-law. She mentioned to her personal trainer that her mother-in-law was confused. She let it slip to the doorman of the neighboring building that she was worried about her husband's mother's mental health. Each comment was a small spark that together began to form a wildfire of rumors. But the witnesses were also active. Mr. Miller, the elderly neighbor, had been observing with growing concern what was happening next door. On a Saturday afternoon, he was watering his orchids when he saw Eleanor in the backyard, kneeling, pulling weeds under the hot sun. The old woman looked exhausted, her face red, her breathing labored. Mr. Miller dropped the hose and called over the wall. Eleanor, are you all right? This sun is too strong to be doing that kind of work. Eleanor looked up and managed a tired smile. I'm fine, Mr. Miller. Thanks for your concern. You shouldn't be straining yourself so much. Where are the other people in the house? Why don't they hire a gardener? Eleanor looked away. Patricia had fired the gardener 2 months ago, citing budget cuts, but Mr. Miller knew that house was swimming in money. There was no need to cut anything. The truth was that Patricia wanted more work for Eleanor. Oh, it's more economical for me to do it myself. I don't mind. Mr. Miller didn't insist, but he decided at that moment that he needed to act. He went back inside and called his daughter, who lived in Greenwich Village. Honey, I need your help. There's a very worrying situation happening here at the house next door. And he told her everything he had observed over the past few weeks. Mr. Miller's daughter, a human rights lawyer, listened attentively and promised she would look into it. Inside the mansion, Lucas continued to record scenes whenever possible. He had created a hidden folder on his computer where he stored the videos and photos he captured. They were seemingly innocent scenes, but they showed a clear pattern of exploitation. His grandmother cleaning the car, his grandmother carrying heavy boxes, his grandmother on her knees scrubbing the floor. And in every scene, Patricia was nearby, watching like a foreman overseeing forced labor. Lucas didn't know exactly what he would do with the material, but something inside him told him that this evidence would be important. He loved his grandmother, and he hated seeing the suffering in her eyes. One night, Lucas went down to the kitchen for water and found his grandmother sitting alone in the dark, with only the faint light from the garden coming through the window. She wasn't doing anything, just sitting, staring into space. Grandma, why are you in the dark? Eleanor turned, startled. Oh, my angel, I was just resting a bit before bed. Lucas turned on the light and pulled up a chair to sit next to her. Grandma, can I ask you something? Eleanor nodded, taking her grandson's hand affectionately. Are you happy here? The question caught Eleanor by surprise. She opened her mouth to give the automatic answer, the answer she had given so many times. Of course I am. But when she looked into her grandson's eyes and saw genuine concern, true love, the words got stuck in her throat, and for the first time Eleanor was honest. No, my love, I'm not happy here, but I need to be near your father. He's all I have. Lucas squeezed his grandmother's hand tightly. Grandma, what my mum is doing to you isn't right. I know you're suffering. I see it. Eleanor felt tears well up, but she held them back. Your father can't know, Lucas. Promise me you won't tell him anything. He already has too many worries. Lucas hesitated. He didn't want to make that promise, but seeing the desperation in his grandmother's eyes, he finally agreed. But inside his anger grew. Anger at his mother, anger at the situation, anger at himself for feeling so helpless. The days passed and Patricia increased the pressure. She started giving more explicit, more humiliating orders. On a Monday morning, she woke Eleanor at 5 by banging on the door of the back room. Eleanor, I woke up early and saw the master bathroom is dirty. I need you to clean it now. I have a video conference at 7 and I can't use a bathroom in that condition. Eleanor, dizzy with sleep, stumbled out of bed. She put on her old robe and followed Patricia to the master suite. The bathroom was perfectly clean. Patricia had just used it and had deliberately left soap marks on the sink and water splashes on the mirror. "Do you see this? Unacceptable. Clean it all and make it spotless." And she left, leaving Eleanor alone. The old woman looked at the marble bathroom, the gold fixtures, the jacuzzi tub, and for the first time she felt something beyond resignation. She felt revolt, but she cleaned it. Because she wasn't ready to rebel yet. The armor of silence, though cracked, still protected her. That same afternoon, Patricia took it a step further. She invited her mother to lunch at the club, a social outing they had once a month. During lunch, Patricia casually commented on Eleanor's condition. "You know, Mom, I'm very worried about Eleanor. She's been so forgetful. The other day I found her in the garden, disoriented, not knowing where she was. I was terrified." Patricia's mother, an elegant woman with perfectly coiffed grey hair, frowned. "Really? What a delicate situation. Have you thought about putting her in a home? There are wonderful facilities that handle these cases." Patricia sighed. "I've talked to Robert about it, but you know how sons are. They have a hard time accepting that their mother is aging. But I think I'll have to insist soon. It's for her own safety." One more person was being fed the false narrative, and Patricia knew that the more people who believed the story, the easier it would be to convince Robert. Meanwhile, Brenda continued to record. She had managed to capture several compromising conversations. One was particularly revealing. Patricia on the phone with a friend, laughing as she described how she was using Eleanor as a housekeeper. "You have no idea, she even washes my car. It's great, I don't have to pay anyone, and the best part is, Robert has no clue. He thinks she's just relaxing." Brenda saved that recording like it was gold. It was the definitive proof of Patricia's cruelty, the proof that it was all just exploitation and malice. On a Thursday night, Robert finally managed to stay home. He had decided not to travel the following Friday, so he could spend the weekend with his family. Patricia, seeing that her husband would be more present, temporarily reduced her orders to her mother-in-law. She went back to being the polite, attentive daughter-in-law whenever Robert was around. At dinner that night, Eleanor sat at the table with the family. Robert talked about a new project at the construction firm. Lucas listened in silence, poking at the food on his plate. Patricia smiled and asked interested questions. Everything seemed perfect, a harmonious family having dinner in a beautiful house. But appearances can be deceiving. Eleanor barely ate. Her stomach was in knots with anxiety. She knew this peace was temporary. As soon as Robert started traveling again, it would all start over. The orders, the humiliations, the forced labor. And she didn't know how much longer she could endure it. After dinner, Robert asked his mother to talk with him alone in his office. Eleanor's heart raced. Had he finally noticed? Had someone told him? "Mum, sit down. I want to talk to you about something." Eleanor sat in the leather armchair across from the mahogany desk. Robert remained standing, leaning against the bookshelf, his hands in his pockets. "Patricia told me you've been a bit forgetful, that you've been confusing things. Is that true?" Eleanor felt the ground give way beneath her, so that was it. Patricia had succeeded. The narrative had reached Robert, and now he was there, looking at her with that expression of concern that hid doubt. "Son, I'm not forgetful. I'm tired. Those are different things." Robert frowned. "Tired? But you don't work, Mom. You live here. You have everything you need. Why would you be tired?" And there it was, the son she had raised, who knew every sacrifice she had made, believing she didn't work, believing she lived a life of comfort, because he didn't see, because he wasn't present, because Patricia was very good at hiding the truth. Eleanor could have told him everything right then. She could have broken the silence there in the quiet office, just her and her son, but when she looked at Robert, she saw a tired man with dark circles under his eyes, his shoulders slumped from the weight of his responsibilities. And she couldn't. "It's just my age, son. Don't worry about me." Robert came closer and kissed his mother's forehead. "Even so, I think we should make an appointment with a neurologist, just to make sure everything's okay. All right? Eleanor nodded, defeated. All right. When she left the office, she found Patricia in the hallway. Her daughter-in-law had a victorious smile on her lips. She said nothing, just crossed her arms and watched Eleanor walk by. The message was clear. Patricia was winning. That night, Eleanor lay in the narrow bed of her back room and cried silently. She cried for the life she had imagined. She cried for the son who couldn't see. She cried for herself. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if she just left? What if she walked out of that house and never came back? But where would she go? She had no money. She had nowhere else to go. Robert was all she had. That house, as much as it was a prison, was her only option, or so Eleanor thought. Because things were about to change. The witnesses were getting organized. Brenda, Mr. Miller, and Lucas, each in their own way, were gathering evidence, planning, waiting for the right moment. And that moment was closer than anyone imagined. The following Friday, Robert had to travel to Washington, D.C. last minute. An emergency at a site that couldn't wait. He left early in the morning, promising to be back on Sunday. And as soon as his car disappeared around the corner of the tree-lined Upper East Side street, Patricia went back to being who she really was. Eleanor, I want the house spotless by tonight. I'm having some friends over for dinner and I can't have anything out of place. The tone was an order, not a request. Eleanor, who was having breakfast in the kitchen with Brenda, felt her whole body tense up. Brenda looked at her and then at Patricia with barely contained anger. But Eleanor just nodded and got up to start her work. The day was grueling. Eleanor cleaned the entire house, prepared appetizers for the dinner, set the table and organized the living room. When Patricia's friends arrived at 8 o'clock, the old woman was exhausted, her legs trembling, her back on fire with pain. She retreated to her back room and lay down, still dressed, too weak to even take a shower. But she couldn't sleep. She heard the laughter from the living room, the lively conversations, the clinking of wine glasses, and something inside her finally broke. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no sudden revelation. It was just the accumulation, the weight of months of humiliation, of forced labor, of disrespect, the weight of loneliness, of invisibility, of ignored pain. Eleanor got up from the bed and went to the small mirror hanging on the wall. She looked at her own reflection in the dim light of the lamp. She saw a woman she didn't recognize, too thin, too stooped, too tired. Where was the strong woman who had raised a son alone? Where was the woman who sewed wedding dresses and school uniforms with pride? Where was Eleanor? And at that moment, looking at her own reflection, she made a decision. She didn't know how or when yet, but she knew she couldn't take it anymore. The silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was just slowly killing her. And she didn't want to die like this. She didn't want to die silent, invisible, defeated. Tomorrow, Eleanor thought, tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow would bring much more than she imagined. It would bring the confrontation that would change everything. It would bring the truth to light. It would bring justice. And it would bring, finally, the end of the burning silence. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but the gears were already in motion. Brenda had contacted Mr. Miller's daughter, the lawyer. Lucas had organized all the videos into a single folder. Mr. Miller had spoken with other neighbors, alerting them to the situation. And everyone, without Eleanor's knowledge, was ready to act. The following Saturday, Eleanor woke up with a different kind of determination. It wasn't declared rebellion, but a growing awareness that she needed to survive this somehow. She got up early as always, but this time she looked at the house with different eyes. These luxurious walls were her prison. These well-tended gardens were the scene of her exploitation. Patricia appeared in the kitchen around 9 in the morning, already perfectly dressed to go out. She had a Pilates class at 10 and then lunch with friends at the shops at Columbus Circle. Before leaving, she left a to-do list on the kitchen counter. I want all of this done when I get back. And Eleanor, clean the pool bathroom well, it's disgusting. Eleanor looked at the list. There were 12 tasks that would take the entire day to complete. Brenda, who was making juice in the kitchen, saw the scene and had to bite her tongue to keep from exploding. When Patricia left, she approached Eleanor and said in a low but firm voice, "Eleanor, you don't have to do all this. Let me help. We'll split the tasks." Eleanor smiled gratefully, but shook her head. "If she finds out you helped me, she'll fire you, Brenda. You have 3 children to support. I can't let you lose your job because of me." Brenda felt her eyes sting. Here was a woman being exploited, humiliated, slowly destroyed, and still worrying about others. "Then at least rest when you can and drink water. This heat is unbearable." Eleanor began the tasks. After 2 hours of work, she had to stop. She felt a strong wave of dizziness and had to lean against the wall. Her heart was racing. Her breath was short. Brenda appeared with a glass of ice water and made Eleanor sit down. "You're going to kill yourself like this, Eleanor. Literally. You'll have a heart attack or faint and hit your head." Eleanor drank the water in small sips. "I'm fine. I just need a minute." But Brenda had already made a decision. She took out her phone and called Mr. Miller's daughter, the lawyer, who had offered to help. They talked for a few minutes, and the lawyer asked to speak with Eleanor. Brenda handed her the phone. "Eleanor, my name is Marina. I'm a lawyer and the daughter of Mr. Miller, your neighbor. He told me about your situation. I would very much like to speak with you in person. Can I come over this afternoon?" Eleanor hesitated, but something in that firm, kind voice made her agree. "Yes, you can." Marina arrived at 3 in the afternoon, while Patricia was still out. She was a woman in her 40s, her hair in a professional bun, wearing a navy blue suit, a leather briefcase in her hand. She sat with Eleanor in the kitchen while Brenda made coffee. "Eleanor, I'm going to be direct with you. What is happening here is a crime. Conditions analogous to slavery, elder abuse. You have rights, and I'm here to help you exercise them." Eleanor listened in silence, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "But it's my son's house. I can't cause trouble for him." Marina leaned forward, looking into Eleanor's eyes. "You are not causing trouble. The person who is exploiting you is causing trouble, and your son needs to know the truth." The conversation lasted an hour. Marina explained Eleanor's rights, the laws protecting the elderly, the steps that could be taken. She also asked for permission to see the recordings Brenda had made. Brenda took out her phone and showed her. Marina listened to every audio, watched every clip, and her expression grew more and more serious. "This is more than enough. With this evidence, we can file several lawsuits. But first, Eleanor, I need you to understand something. You are not obligated to live like this. You have options. I can help you." Eleanor nodded, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "What do I need to do?" "For now, nothing. Continue your routine. But if at any moment you feel you are in danger, call me. I'll leave you my card. And Brenda, keep recording everything. The more evidence we have, the better." When Marina left, Eleanor felt strangely lighter. For the first time in months, she felt she wasn't alone. But reality was still harsh. Patricia returned home at 7 in the evening and inspected every task on the list. She found a corner of the pool bathroom that wasn't perfectly clean and made Eleanor redo it all. The old woman, exhausted, obeyed. When she finally finished, it was almost 10 o'clock. Eleanor dragged herself to her back room and collapsed on the bed. On Sunday, Robert returned from Washington, D.C. He arrived in high spirits, talking about how well the project was progressing. Patricia greeted him with hugs and kisses, the perfect wife. Lucas watched everything from the stairs, his fists clenched with suppressed anger. During Sunday lunch, Eleanor sat at the table as usual, but this time Lucas noticed something that alarmed him. His grandmother could barely hold her silverware. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Grandma, let me cut that for you." Lucas took his grandmother's plate and cut the meat into small pieces. Robert, distracted, talking to Patricia, didn't notice. But Lucas did. After lunch, Lucas followed his grandmother to her back room. "Grandma, you're sick. You need to see a doctor." Eleanor sat on the bed and pulled her grandson to sit beside her. "I'm just tired, my love." "Don't worry." "I do worry. And I'm going to tell my dad what's happening here." Eleanor grabbed Lucas's arm tightly. "No, Please, Lucas, don't say anything yet. Promise." Lucas looked at his grandmother and saw a desperate plea in her eyes. "Okay, Grandma, but if it gets worse, I'm telling him. I don't care if you get mad at me." Eleanor hugged her grandson and cried softly on his shoulder. Lucas hugged her back, feeling his grandmother's frail body tremble in his arms. That night was particularly difficult for Eleanor. The pain in her back was unbearable. At 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleeping. She got up, put on her old robe, and walked to the kitchen. She sat at the table, in the dark, with only the moonlight coming through the window. And there, alone in the silent kitchen, Eleanor finally allowed herself to feel all the pain she had held in for so long. She cried. She cried loudly, not caring if anyone heard. And it was there, crying in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, that Eleanor finally accepted something she had been denying for months. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help. She needed the truth to come out. She needed, finally, to break the silence. The following Monday, something happened that accelerated events. Robert was at home working in his office. Patricia had gone to the salon. Eleanor was in the laundry room folding clothes when Lucas came home from school early. The boy ran up the stairs when he heard strange sounds coming from his grandmother's room. They were low moans of pain. Lucas dropped his backpack in the hallway and ran to the small back room. He found his grandmother sitting on the bed, her face contorted, her hands clutching her back. "Grandma, what's happening?" "Lucas, my angel, it's nothing, just a pain that will pass." But Lucas saw it wasn't just a pain. It was something serious. He ran to his father's office and banged on the door. Dad, come quick, Grandma's not well." Robert dropped his papers and ran downstairs. When he reached the back room and saw his mother in that state, his heart pounded. "Mom, what are you feeling?" Eleanor tried to smile, to downplay it. "It's just my back, son. It'll pass." Robert looked around the room for the first time in months. Really looked. He saw the thin, worn mattress. He saw the old wardrobe. He saw the small window. He saw the poverty of that room in contrast to the luxury of the rest of the house, and something began to stir inside him. "I'm taking you to the hospital, now." Eleanor tried to protest, but Robert wouldn't have it. He carefully lifted his mother into his arms and carried her to the car. Lucas went with them. In the emergency room at Mount Sinai Hospital, Eleanor was seen by a doctor who ran tests and diagnosed a severe inflammation in her spine caused by excessive physical strain. "Physical strain? You're 72 years old. What kind of physical strain have you been doing?" Eleanor looked at Robert, then at Lucas, then at the doctor, and for the first time she didn't lie. "Housework, heavy cleaning." The doctor frowned. "Do you live alone?" "No, I live with my son." The doctor looked at Robert with an expression that was half confusion, half judgment. "Your son lets you do heavy labor at this age?" Robert felt his face flush. "No, my mother doesn't do heavy labor. She lives with us. We have a housekeeper." The doctor turned back to Eleanor. "Mum, would you like to tell me the truth?" And there, in the cold white emergency room, with her son beside her and her grandson holding her hand, Eleanor finally told him. She told him everything. The endless chores, the humiliations, the exhaustion, the pain, the exploitation. Each word was like pulling out a thorn that had been embedded for a long time. It hurt, but it was a relief. Robert listened in silence, his face growing paler and paler. Lucas squeezed his grandmother's hand, tears streaming down his face, and when Eleanor finished, the silence in the room was heavy, laden with finally revealed truths. Robert said nothing. He couldn't. The anger, the guilt, the shame, it was all mixed up inside him. He paid the hospital bill, helped his mother back to the car and drove home in silence. When they arrived, Patricia was in the living room watching television. She looked at the three of them entering and immediately sensed that something had changed. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. "What happened? Did you take her to the doctor?" Robert looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. And what he saw wasn't the elegant, perfect woman he had fallen in love with. It was someone else, someone he didn't know, someone who had hidden a monstrous truth from him. We need to talk. Now. The storm was brewing, and when it finally broke over that Upper East Side mansion, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence inside the car during the drive from the hospital to the mansion was dense, heavy as lead. Robert gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. Eleanor sat in the back, her hand intertwined with Lucas's, who kept looking at his grandmother with concern. No one spoke. There were no words to fill the void that had settled between them. Robert tried to process everything he had heard in the doctor's office. Every word his mother had said echoed in his mind like a relentless bell: washing cars, cleaning bathrooms, carrying heavy buckets, working to the point of exhaustion. And he, blind, absent, immersed in his own world, had seen nothing. Absolutely nothing. Guilt was a clenched fist squeezing his chest, but along with the guilt came anger, an anger that grew with every second, every breath. Anger at Patricia, anger at himself, anger at the whole situation. When the car pulled into the mansion's garage, Robert turned off the engine but didn't get out immediately. He just sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring into the empty space ahead. Lucas opened the back door and helped his grandmother out. Eleanor held onto her grandson's arm, feeling her legs tremble. The medication the doctor had given her was starting to work, easing the pain, but her body was still weak. Robert finally got out of the car and followed his mother and son to the door leading to the kitchen. Patricia was in the living room, exactly where they had left her, watching a home decorating show on TV. She turned as she heard their footsteps, and the smile that began to form on her face died when she saw Robert's expression. "So? What did the doctor say?" Robert didn't answer right away. He looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Patricia was impeccable as always. Designer clothes, perfectly styled hair, discreet but flawless makeup. Everything about her was calculated, controlled, perfect. And suddenly, Robert felt sick. How had he not seen it before? How had he been so blind? "Mom, go up to your room and rest. Lucas, go with her." Eleanor hesitated, but Lucas gently guided her toward the stairs. She knew what was coming, and for the first time she didn't try to stop it. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a small victory over the pain, and disappeared down the hall. Robert waited until he heard the bedroom door close. Then he turned to Patricia. "We need to talk. Now." Patricia stood up from the sofa, smoothing the skirt of her dress with her hands. "Of course, what happened? Is your mother okay?" "My mother," Robert began, his voice controlled but with a sharp edge, "has a severe inflammation in her spine, caused by excessive physical strain. The question is, Patricia, what kind of physical strain would a 72-year-old woman be doing?" Patricia blinked, surprised by the intensity in Robert's tone. "Oh, well, you know how she is. She likes to help around the house. I always tell her to rest, but she insists." Robert took a step forward. "You always tell her to rest? Really?" "Of course I do." "Then explain to me why the doctor was shocked when he learned my mother lives with me. Explain why. He asked me what kind of son lets his elderly mother do heavy labor. Explain to me, Patricia, why my mother's hands are full of calluses, her back is destroyed, and her body is thin from exhaustion." Patricia took a half step back, but maintained her composure. "Robert, you're exaggerating. Your mother helps out a little here and there. It's normal. She offers to do it herself." Robert felt the anger explode inside him. "Offers? She offers? Or do you order her?" "I have never ordered anything." Patricia raised her voice, indignant. "Your mother is the one who insists on doing things. I've even tried to stop her several times." At that moment, a calm but firm voice came from the kitchen. "That's not true." Brenda appeared at the doorway, separating the kitchen from the living room. She still had her apron on, her hands clean, but held firmly at her sides. Her eyes were fixed on Patricia. "Brenda, this is none of your business," Patricia hissed. "Go back to the kitchen." Brenda didn't move. "It is my business, Mrs. Clark, because I've worked in this house for 5 years. And I saw everything." Robert turned to Brenda. "Saw what, Brenda? Please tell me." Brenda took a deep breath and began. I saw Eleanor being treated like a maid ever since you married Mr. Clark. At first, it was small requests, but it escalated. Orders, humiliations, heavy labor. I saw Eleanor cleaning the car under the scorching sun, while Mrs. Clark sunbathed by the pool. I saw Eleanor on her knees scrubbing the floor while being yelled at because it wasn't clean enough. I saw Eleanor feeling sick from exhaustion, dizzy, in pain, and being forced to keep working. Patricia turned pale. You're lying. Robert, she's lying because she wants to cause trouble in our marriage. Brenda pulled her cell phone from her apron pocket. I'm not lying, and I have proof. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked at the phone in Brenda's hand, then at Patricia, who had lost all color in her face. Proof? Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. Brenda nodded. Recordings. Several of them. I started recording when I realized no one would believe me if I just told them, when I realized Eleanor would never have the courage to speak up. So I recorded, so that one day when it was necessary, the truth could come out. Robert held out his hand. Show me. Brenda approached and handed him the phone. Robert put it on speaker and pressed play on the first recording. Patricia's voice filled the room, cold and cruel, completely different from the polite tone she always used in Robert's presence. Eleanor, I didn't ask you to clean the bathroom. I ordered you, and you're going to clean it again until it's the way I want it. And don't give me any excuses about being tired. You live here for free. The least you can do is make yourself useful. Robert felt his stomach turn. That wasn't the voice of the woman he knew, or rather thought he knew. Brenda played the second recording. This time, Patricia was on the phone with someone. You have no idea. She even washes my car. It's great. I don't have to pay anyone. And the best part is Robert has no clue. He thinks she's just relaxing. Laughter. Yeah, I know. She's very obedient. Old and obedient. Robert dropped the phone on the sofa as if it were burning. He turned to Patricia, who was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Is there more? Robert asked Brenda, without taking his eyes off Patricia. Yes, a lot more. Brenda took the phone back. But I think you get the picture. Robert took a step toward his wife. You did this to my mother, the woman who raised me alone, the woman who worked until her fingers bled so I could get an education, the woman who never, ever let me go without. And you treated her like a slave. Patricia tried to regain her composure. Robert, you need to understand, your mother is not an easy person to live with. She's stubborn, she does things her own way. I tried to be patient, but shut up. The words came out low, but loaded with a fury that made Patricia shrink. Shut up right now. I don't want to hear any more lies come out of your mouth. I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear anything. Robert turned and began pacing the living room, his hands on his head, trying to process everything. Brenda remained there, a silent witness to the collapse of a charade. Just then, Lucas came running down the stairs. In his hand, he held his own cell phone. Dad, there's something you need to see. Lucas approached his father and started playing the videos he had recorded over the months. There weren't many, but they were enough. Eleanor carrying heavy boxes, Eleanor cleaning the car, Eleanor on her knees scrubbing the floor, and in all of them Patricia in the background watching like an overseer. Robert watched each video in silence. When the last one finished, he looked at his son. How long have you known? Lucas looked down. I started noticing about 3 months ago. I tried to talk to Grandma, but she asked me not to say anything. She said she didn't want to worry you, so I started recording, thinking the proof would be needed one day. Robert pulled his son into a tight hug. You did the right thing. Thank you. When they separated, Robert turned back to Patricia. She had sunk into an armchair, her face buried in her hands. But Robert knew they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of anger at being caught. There's one more thing, Robert. Everyone turned. Mr. Miller was at the front door, accompanied by a woman in a suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Miller, how did you get in? Brenda gave me the key. Forgive the intrusion, but I thought it was important to be here. This is my daughter, Marina. She's a lawyer." Marina stepped forward, extending her hand to Robert. "Good evening, Mr. Clark. I'd like to speak with you about your mother's situation. My father approached me a few weeks ago, concerned about what he had been observing. I spoke with Eleanor, and she authorized me to take the necessary legal action." Robert shook the lawyer's hand, still processing the avalanche of information. "Legal action?" Marina nodded. "What was done to your mother constitutes several crimes. Conditions analogous to slavery, elder abuse, unlawful constraint. I have here," she opened her briefcase, "a complete report with all the evidence we've gathered. Brenda's recordings, Lucas's videos, my father's testimony, and that of other neighbors who also observed the situation, and the medical report that proves the injuries caused by excessive labor." Patricia shot up from the armchair, furious. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine." Marina turned to her with a professional but icy expression. "Actually, ma'am, it's not anyone's word against yours. It's concrete evidence. Audio, video, medical reports, multiple witnesses. And I can assure you that any judge who sees this material will have no doubt about what happened here." Patricia looked around desperately, searching for a way out. But there was none. She was cornered by her own actions, her own recorded words, her own documented cruelty. "Robert," her voice came out almost pleadingly, "Robert, please, you can't believe them. We're married. We're a family." Robert looked at the woman who had been his wife for 3 years, and he felt nothing but disgust. "Family? You don't know what family is. Family is what my mother did for me, working until her bones ached so I could have a future, giving up everything so I wouldn't go hungry. That's family. What you did was torture. It was cruelty. It was destroying someone who had already suffered her whole life." He turned to Marina. "What do I need to do?" Marina opened her briefcase again. "First, I recommend that this woman," she gestured to Patricia, "leaves this house immediately. Second, we will file for divorce tomorrow morning. And third, I will file a lawsuit for moral and physical damages against her on behalf of Eleanor." Patricia opened her mouth to protest, but Robert held up his hand. "No, it's over. I want you to pack your things and leave, now, tonight. This house belongs to my mother. It always has. I bought this house for her. And you are kicked out." Patricia looked around one last time, searching for allies, but she only found hard stares. Brenda with her arms crossed, Lucas with anger in his eyes, Mr. Miller and Marina with professional but unyielding expressions, and Robert, the husband she had manipulated for 3 years, now looking at her, with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "Fine," Patricia finally said, her voice full of venom. "I'll leave. But you'll regret this, Robert. You and your precious little mother." Robert took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Watch your words, Patricia. You're already neck-deep in legal trouble. Don't make it worse." Patricia turned and stomped up the stairs. They heard the sound of slamming doors, drawers being opened and closed, the dragging of suitcases. 15 minutes later, she came down carrying 2 large bags. She walked through the living room without looking at anyone, went out the front door, and disappeared into the night. When the sound of her car faded away, silence once again filled the house. But it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer oppressive. It was the silence of relief, of the end of a battle, of the beginning of healing. Robert went upstairs and knocked gently on the door of the back room. "Mom, can I come in?" Eleanor was sitting on the bed, her hands in her lap. When she saw her son, her eyes filled with tears. Robert entered and knelt in front of his mother, taking her hands in his. "Forgive me, Mum. Forgive me for not seeing. Forgive me for letting this happen. Forgive me for being such a blind, absent, useless son." Eleanor touched her son's face with trembling hands. "You didn't know, son. She was very good at hiding it. But I should have noticed. I'm your son. I should have seen you were suffering. I should have seen the exhaustion, the pain, the sadness in your eyes." Robert cried there, kneeling on the cold floor of that small room, holding the mother he had failed to protect. Eleanor cried with him, but now her tears were different. They were no longer tears of silent pain. They were tears of liberation. When they finally separated, Robert looked around the room. "This isn't your room. It never was. Tomorrow, we'll set up the master suite for you. With the king-size bed, the huge walk-in closet, the view of the garden. That's your room. It always should have been." "Mom," Robert continued, "I'm going to fix everything. I'm going to cut back on my travel. I'm going to reorganize my life. I'm going to be present. For real, you won't be alone anymore, never again." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I just want you to be happy, son." "I can't be happy knowing you're suffering, Mom. Your happiness is my happiness. It always has been. I just forgot that for a while. But I'll never forget again. I promise." Lucas appeared at the door, hesitant. "Can I come in?" Eleanor held out her arms, and her grandson ran to hug her. "Grandma, I love you so much. I'm so glad everything is going to be okay now." The three of them stood there, embracing, forming a circle of protection and love. Downstairs, Brenda, Mr. Miller, and Marina were discussing the next legal steps. But up there, in that small room that would soon be abandoned, a family was rebuilding itself on the rubble of pain. The next morning, Robert woke up early and started preparing the master suite for his mother. He changed all the sheets, organized the closet, and placed fresh flowers on the nightstand. When Eleanor woke up, he took her to the new room and opened the door. "This is your room now, Mom. And you will never have to clean anything you don't want to again. You will never have to work until you hurt yourself. You will never have to feel less than what you are, because you are everything. You have always been everything." Eleanor walked into the enormous room, with its large windows that let in the sunlight generously. She sat on the soft bed and felt the mattress give way comfortably under her weight. And for the first time in months, she smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. In the following days, life in the Upper East Side mansion began to change. Robert cancelled all non-essential trips. He called his office and completely reorganized his work schedule. He delegated projects to his team, declined meetings that could be handled by video conference, and made it clear to everyone that his priority now was to be present at home. On the second day after Patricia's departure, Robert hired the best physical therapist he could find. Dr. Evans was an experienced woman in her 50s who had worked for decades in geriatric rehabilitation. When she examined Eleanor for the first time, her face grew serious. "Eleanor, you have injuries that indicate repetitive strain over a long period. We're going to need at least 3 months of intensive physical therapy, but I promise you will get better." Eleanor, lying on the makeshift treatment table in the living room that Robert had temporarily converted, looked at her son. "Son, this must be expensive. You don't need to spend so much on me." Robert held his mother's hand firmly. "Mom, I have money. I have more money than I need. And there is no better use for this money than taking care of you. So please let Dr. Evans do her work. And don't worry about anything else." The physical therapy sessions began the next day. They were painful at first. Each stretch was a reminder of the months of suffering. But Eleanor was strong. She had survived raising a son alone, poverty, humiliation. She would survive this too. Lucas came home from school every day and went straight to keep his grandmother company. He would sit beside her during the therapy sessions, holding her hand when the pain was most intense. He showed her his schoolwork, told her about his friends, and talked about his plans for college applications. And slowly, Eleanor began to take an interest in the life around her again. Brenda continued to work at the house, but the dynamic had completely changed. Robert gave her a substantial raise and ensured she only worked her scheduled hours without being overworked. He hired another housekeeper to share the duties, and most importantly, he treated them both with the respect they deserved. One afternoon, about a week after Patricia's expulsion, Mr. Miller came to visit. Robert greeted him with a warm hug. "Mr. Miller, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you and Marina, I might never have found out the truth." Mr. Miller smiled, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Son, I just did what any decent neighbor would do. Your mother is a wonderful woman. I couldn't just stand by and watch her suffer." The two sat in the garden, where Eleanor was watering the roses. She now did this by choice, during the cooler parts of the day, calmly and with pleasure. There was no more urgency, no more fear. "Eleanor, Mr. Miller called out. "Those roses are beautiful. You have a green thumb." Eleanor turned and smiled. "Oh, Mr. Miller, I've always loved plants. When Robert and I lived in that little apartment in the Bronx, I had a few pots on the windowsill. Nothing fancy, but I cared for them. Here," she looked around the immense garden, "here I can tend to a real garden." Mr. Miller nodded, understanding. "And are you recovering well from the pain?" "I am. The physical therapist is very good, and Robert won't leave me alone." Eleanor chuckled softly. "He's always checking on me to make sure I'm taking my medicine, doing my exercises. It feels like the roles have reversed. Now he's the one taking care of me." Robert, listening to the conversation, felt a tightness in his chest. Here's how it should have been from the beginning. Him taking care of the mother who had taken such good care of him. But he had failed, and that failure was something he would carry forever. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Patricia was dealing with the consequences of her actions. The news of the divorce and the accusations spread quickly through her social circle. The same friends who had sipped tea in the mansion and listened to Patricia badmouth her mother-in-law now avoided her. No one wanted to be associated with someone accused of elder abuse. It was a social scandal. Patricia tried to deny the accusations, but Marina had been strategic. She released some of the recordings to the media, with Eleanor's permission. When people heard Patricia's voice, cold and cruel, ordering an elderly woman to work like a slave, public opinion turned completely against her. A weekly magazine published a full feature on the case. The cover showed an old photo of a smiling Eleanor next to a young Robert with the headline, "The Mother Who Gave Everything and Was Treated Like Nothing." The article told Eleanor's story, from her years of struggle to raise her son alone to the humiliation she suffered in the house that was supposed to be her refuge. Robert read the article from beginning to end, tears streaming down his face. When he finished, he took the magazine to his mother. "Mum, have you seen this?" Eleanor took the magazine and flipped through the pages. There were old photos that Robert had provided for the story. A young Eleanor holding baby Robert. Eleanor at Robert's graduation, proud beside her son. And there were also recent photos taken by Mr. Miller through the wall, showing Eleanor working in the garden while Patricia watched. "It's strange to see my life like this laid out for everyone to see," Eleanor said softly. "But maybe it's necessary. Maybe other people who are going through the same thing will know they can ask for help." That's exactly what happened. In the days following the article's publication, dozens of letters arrived at the magazine. They were stories of other Eleanors, other mothers-in-law, other elderly people being exploited, humiliated, forgotten within their own families. Eleanor's story had touched a raw nerve in society. Marina used the case to start an awareness campaign about the rights of the elderly. She gave interviews, lectures, and wrote articles, and Eleanor, shyly at first but with growing confidence, agreed to give a few interviews as well. In one of them, for a morning television show, the host asked, "Eleanor, why did you endure everything in silence for so long?" Eleanor thought for a moment before answering, "Because I thought I was protecting my son. I thought if I told the truth I would destroy his marriage, and I didn't want to be the mother who causes problems. But what I learned is that silence doesn't protect anyone. Silence only allows the suffering to continue." The interview went viral on social media, millions of views, thousands of comments, and among those comments, many were from people sharing their own stories, asking for help, seeking the courage to break their own silences. Back at the Upper East Side mansion, the routine was settling into a healthier form. Robert woke up early, had breakfast with his mother and son, took Lucas to school, went to the office but always came back for lunch at home. In the afternoon he worked from his home office, but with the door always open, available for his mother whenever she needed him. The evenings were sacred. Family dinner, the three of them sitting at the table talking about their day. Sometimes they watched a movie together, sometimes they just sat in the garden, enjoying the cool night air. They were simple moments but filled with meaning. One of these evenings, about a month after Patricia's departure, Eleanor was sitting in the garden with Robert. The sky was clear, stars shining above them. Eleanor was drinking chamomile tea, Robert a glass of red wine. "Son, I want to tell you something." Robert turned to his mother. "You can tell me anything, Mom. I forgive you. For not seeing, for not being present. I forgive you completely. And I don't want you to carry this guilt for the rest of your life. You're here now. You're present now. That's what matters." Robert felt tears well up again. "Thank you, Mom, but I still feel guilty. I should have noticed." "Guilt serves no purpose, son. It only keeps you trapped in the past. What we can do is learn and move forward. And that's what we're doing. We're building something new on the ruins of what was destroyed." Robert took his mother's hand and kissed it. "I love you, Mom, more than I can say." "I know, son. I always have. And I love you too." Meanwhile, the legal case against Patricia moved forward. Marina was meticulous, presenting every piece of evidence in an organized and compelling manner. Patricia tried to hire the best lawyers, but there was no defense against the documented truth. On the day of the settlement hearing, Patricia appeared with her lawyer. She looked different. Her hair was no longer perfectly styled. Her makeup was simpler. Her clothes, though still elegant, no longer had that expensive, designer sheen. She had lost everything: the house, the social status, the respect of society. When she saw Eleanor enter the room, accompanied by Robert and Marina, Patricia looked down. She couldn't face her mother-in-law. She had tried to destroy that woman, and in the end, she was the one who was destroyed. The judge read the case file, examined the evidence, and heard the testimonies, and at the end, he brought down the gavel. Patricia was ordered to pay a substantial sum for moral and physical damages. In addition, she would have to serve community service in nursing homes, caring for the elderly. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. When they left the courthouse, Eleanor took a deep breath of the New York afternoon air. "It's over," she said. "It's really over." Robert hugged his mother. "It is, Mom. And now a new story begins. Our story, the way it always should have been." And so it was. Life in the Upper East Side mansion was completely transformed. Brenda became part of the family, not just a housekeeper, but a friend. Lucas grew up seeing an example of respect, love, and dignity. Robert learned to balance work and family, never again putting money above the people he loved. And Eleanor finally could live, truly live, no longer bent by the weight of humiliation, no longer silenced by fear, no longer invisible. She started sewing again, now making clothes to donate to charities. She went back to tending the garden, creating a haven of peace and beauty. She started smiling again, laughing, shining. Her body still bore the marks of suffering. Her back still ached on cold days. Her hands still had calluses from years of hard work. But Eleanor was not ashamed of these marks. They were medals of survival, proof that she had walked through hell and come out the other side. The truth had hurt. The revelation had been traumatic, but it had been necessary, because only the truth could set her free. Only the truth could heal. Only the truth could rebuild what had been broken. And in that mansion that was once a prison, something new and strong now flourished. Respect, love, dignity, a real family. A family that looked back not with shame, but with gratitude for having had the courage to change. A family that looked forward with hope, knowing the worst was over. The burning silence had turned into a voice, and that voice, finally heard, echoed through the walls of that house, saying one single thing: enough, never again. And it truly never would be again. 6 months had passed since that night when the truth finally came to light. 6 months since Patricia walked out of the Upper East Side mansion, carrying her suitcases and her shame. 6 months since the burning silence was finally broken. And in those 6 months, life had changed in a way Eleanor never imagined possible. It was a sunny and cool Sunday morning, the kind New York occasionally gifts its residents. Eleanor woke up in the master suite, in the soft king-size bed that was now hers. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, bathing the room in a gentle glow. She stretched slowly, feeling her muscles lengthen without pain. The physical therapy had worked wonders. Her back still reminded her of its presence on very cold days, but the constant ache, the one that accompanied her every move, was gone. Eleanor got up and walked to the window. From her room she had a privileged view of the garden she loved so much. The roses were in bloom, the oak trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. It was the same garden as before, but now she saw it with different eyes. They were no longer plants she was forced to tend under the scorching sun. They were flowers she cultivated for pleasure, for love, by choice. In the kitchen, Robert was already awake, making breakfast. He had learned to cook in recent months. Nothing too elaborate, but he could make decent scrambled eggs, crispy toast, and strong coffee, just the way his mother liked it. Brenda had Sundays off, so Robert made a point of taking over the kitchen. "Good morning, Mum. Sleep well?" Eleanor entered the kitchen and kissed her son's cheek. "I slept wonderfully. And you? You didn't have to wake up early on a Sunday." Robert smiled. "I wanted to. I like making breakfast for you. It makes me feel useful." Eleanor sat at the table and watched her son move around the kitchen. He was different, lighter. His shoulders were no longer tense with stress. His face no longer had those deep, dark circles of exhaustion. Robert had learned to delegate at work, to trust his team, to not carry everything alone. And most importantly, he had learned that professional success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Patricia didn't contest it. She couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. She lost everything in the settlement: the house, the car, the alimony she had hoped to receive, and most importantly, she lost her reputation. In the social circle she valued so much, her name became synonymous with cruelty. The friends who once admired her now crossed the street to avoid greeting her. Robert felt no pity, only relief at having cut that toxic person out of his life, and gratitude for having woken up in time to save his mother. Lucas came downstairs yawning, his hair still messy from sleep. At 16, he had grown up, not just physically, but emotionally. The events of the past few months had matured him in a way no class or book ever could. He had learned about injustice and courage, about silence and truth, about what a real family is. "Morning, family." Lucas kissed his grandmother on the forehead and sat down next to her. "What's the plan for today?" Robert served the scrambled eggs onto plates. "Today's a party day, don't you remember? The grand opening of Grandma's sewing studio." Eleanor smiled, but there was nervousness mixed with her joy. "Oh, son, I still think you're overdoing it. A whole studio just for me to sew?" Robert sat at the table and held his mother's hand. "Mum, you've been a seamstress your whole life. You've made beautiful dresses, mended clothes, created wonderful things. You deserve to have your own space with good machines, quality materials. And you've already said you want to teach sewing to young people from underprivileged communities. You need a proper place for that." It was true. In recent months, Eleanor had discovered a new purpose. She wanted to teach what she knew. She wanted to pass on the skills that had sustained her through difficult years. Robert had rented a small commercial space near the house, completely renovated it, and turned it into a sewing studio equipped with the best of everything. Today was the grand opening, with a small party for friends and neighbors. After breakfast, the three of them got ready for the opening. Eleanor wore a light blue dress. She had sewn herself. It was simple but elegant, with a cut that flattered her now healthier figure. In recent months, she had gained weight. Not a lot, but enough that her face was no longer gaunt, that her bones no longer protruded through her clothes. When they arrived at the studio, a few people were already waiting. Brenda was there with her 3 children, all adults now, smiling and proud. Mr. Miller arrived with his daughter, Marina, who had become not just the family's lawyer, but also a friend. A few curious and supportive neighbors also showed up. Robert cut the symbolic ribbon at the studio door and invited everyone inside. The space was large and well lit. There were 6 professional sewing machines, large tables for cutting fabric, shelves organized with threads of every color, and neatly folded fabrics. On the wall, Robert had framed old photos of Eleanor sewing, and a phrase he had personally chosen was painted in beautiful letters. "Every stitch tells a story. Every seam is a new beginning." Eleanor walked through the studio with tears in her eyes. She ran her hand over the machines, touched the fabrics, looked at the photos on the wall. It was more than a physical space. It was the recognition of a lifetime of work. It was the validation of her skills. It was proof that she was not, and never had been, useless. "My son," Eleanor turned to Robert, her voice choked with emotion. "You didn't have to do all this." Robert hugged his mother. "Yes, I did. You spent your whole life giving me everything. Now it's my turn to give something to you. And this," he gestured to the studio, "is just the beginning." The party was lively. Brenda brought snacks, Mr. Miller brought wine. Lucas put on some background music, and everyone talked, laughed, and toasted to Eleanor's new beginning. Marina gave a short speech talking about Eleanor's courage, about how her story had inspired so many others to seek justice. And later, when everyone had gone and only Robert, Eleanor, and Lucas remained in the quiet studio, the three of them sat in the work chairs and just savored the moment. "You know what's funny?" Eleanor broke the silence. "During all those months of suffering, I thought I was protecting you, son. I thought my silence was an act of love. But what I learned is that true love doesn't stay silent in the face of injustice. True love confronts, speaks, acts." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "And I learned that success isn't measured by the size of your house or your bank account. It's measured by the moments you spend with the people you love, by the laughter at breakfast, by the conversations in the garden at dusk, by being present." Lucas, who had been listening quietly, added, "And I learned that a real family defends each other. No matter what anyone says, no matter who the aggressor is, we protect the people we love. Always." The three of them sat there for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts, thinking about the journey they had taken, the pain they had overcome, the lessons they had learned, the family that had broken and rebuilt itself stronger. In the days following the opening, Eleanor began teaching her first sewing classes. 5 young women from a nearby community signed up. They were girls between 15 and 18, from humble families, who saw sewing as an opportunity to have a profession. Eleanor welcomed them with the same affection with which she had raised Robert. She taught not only the techniques but also perseverance, dedication, and the pride of a job well done. One of the students, Maria, was the same age Robert had been when Eleanor worked late sewing to pay his bills, and whenever she looked at Maria, focused on the sewing machine, Eleanor saw herself decades ago. But now she wasn't alone. Now she had support. She had resources. She had peace. Robert visited the studio every week. Sometimes he would just watch his mother teach, proud of the strong woman she had always been, and who could now finally shine. Other times, he helped with the administrative side, paying bills, organizing materials, contacting suppliers, and Lucas, whenever he could, would stop by the studio after school. He would sit in a corner with his books and study, while listening to the sound of the sewing machines and the conversations between Eleanor and her students. There was something comforting about that environment, something that made him feel connected to his family's history. One Thursday afternoon, about 2 months after the studio opened, Eleanor was closing up when her cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Eleanor, this is the production team from the show A New Day Live. We'd like to invite you to participate in a special episode about overcoming adversity." Eleanor hesitated. Since her story had been published in the magazine, she had received a few invitations for interviews. She accepted some, declined others. She didn't want her pain to become entertainment. But whenever she did agree to speak, she received messages from people thanking her, saying her story had given them the courage to break their own silences. "Can you give me more details about the show?" The producer explained that it would be an episode about elderly people who had overcome situations of family exploitation. There would be 3 guests, all with similar stories. The idea was not only to tell the stories, but also to discuss the rights of the elderly, how to identify signs of abuse, and how to seek help. Eleanor thought for a moment. "I'll accept, but on one condition. I want my son and my grandson to participate with me. Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of a family that got lost and found its way back." The producer enthusiastically agreed. They scheduled the taping for 2 weeks later. When Eleanor told Robert and Lucas about the invitation, they both accepted immediately. "If you want us there, we'll be there," Robert said. "No question about it." The taping of the show was emotional. Eleanor told her story once more, but this time with Robert and Lucas by her side. She spoke about the years of struggle to raise her son alone, about the hope she had when Robert invited her to live in the mansion, about the gradual transformation from guest to servant, about the fear, the pain, the silence. Robert spoke about the guilt he felt for not having noticed, about how work had blinded him to what was happening in his own home, about the shock of discovering the truth, and about the decision to put his mother first from then on. Lucas spoke about watching his grandmother suffer and feeling helpless, about the decision to start recording as a way to document the injustice, and about the lesson he had learned: never stay silent in the face of wrongdoing, no matter who is committing it. At the end of the show, the host asked, "Eleanor, if you could give one piece of advice to other people who are going through the same thing, what would you say?" Eleanor looked directly at the camera and spoke with a firm voice. "I would say that your silence protects no one. I thought I was protecting my son by not telling him what was happening. But silence only allowed the suffering to continue. If you are being mistreated, exploited, humiliated, speak up. Seek help. Call the National Elder Abuse Hotline. Talk to a neighbor, a friend, a family member. Don't be silent, because you deserve dignity. You deserve respect. You deserve love. Always." The show aired on a Saturday morning and had a huge impact. The National Hotline received thousands of calls in the following weeks. Many were from elderly people in situations similar to Eleanor's. Others were from children who, after watching the show, realized something was wrong with their parents or in-laws and decided to investigate. Eleanor received hundreds of messages, letters, emails, social media messages, all saying the same thing. "Thank you for having the courage to speak. Thank you for breaking the silence. Your story changed my life." And it was there, reading those messages, that Eleanor fully understood the purpose of everything she had been through. The pain had not been in vain. The suffering had meaning, because her story was saving other Eleanors. It was opening the eyes of other Roberts. It was inspiring other Lucases. The months continued to pass, each bringing new discoveries, new joys, new lessons. Eleanor's studio flourished in a way she never imagined. It started with 5 students, but soon the number grew. 10, 15, 20 young women wanting to learn the art of sewing. Eleanor had to hire an assistant, a woman named Mrs. Rose, who had been a professional seamstress for 40 years, and now retired, wanted to teach again. The two made a perfect pair. Eleanor with her infinite patience and motherly way, Mrs. Rose with her refined technique and sharp sense of humor. Together, they turned that studio into a true sanctuary of learning and female empowerment. One of the students, Maria, was 18 and came from a very poor family in the outer boroughs of New York. She arrived at the studio shy, speaking softly, looking at the floor. But Eleanor saw something familiar in her. She saw herself decades ago. That same hunger to learn, that same determination hidden behind insecurity. Eleanor took Maria under her wing. She taught her not only how to sew, but also how to believe in herself. She bought extra materials so Maria could practice at home. She connected the girl with a clothing store that was looking for a freelance seamstress. And 6 months later, Maria was earning her own money, helping her family, and most importantly, smiling with confidence. One day in class, Maria hugged Eleanor tightly and said, "You changed my life, Eleanor. Before I met you, I had no hope. Now I have a profession, I'm proud of myself, I have a future." Eleanor hugged the girl back, tears streaming down her face. "And you, my dear, have shown me that everything I went through had a purpose. You are the proof that pain can be transformed into something good." Christmas arrived. The first Christmas without Patricia. The house had a completely different energy. Light, joyful, welcoming. Eleanor, Robert, and Lucas decorated the tree together, each hanging ornaments while they talked and laughed. Robert put on Christmas music, and the three of them sang off-key but happily. Brenda arrived early on December 24th to help prepare the Christmas dinner. But Eleanor wouldn't let her. Today you're a guest, not an employee. Sit down and have some wine with me while I cook." The two stayed in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing, about Brenda's children, about the students at the studio, about life. They had become true friends over those months, united by adversity, strengthened by shared overcoming. That evening, the table was laden. Roast turkey, stuffing, rice, salads, desserts. Eleanor had cooked everything with love. They all sat around the large dining room table. Robert, Eleanor, Lucas, Brenda and her 3 children, Mr. Miller, Marina and her husband. 11 people in total. A chosen family united not by blood, but by mutual love and respect. On Christmas night after dinner, everyone gathered in the living room. Robert asked for their attention and made a toast. "I want to thank everyone here tonight. Brenda, you were the eyes I didn't have. You saw what was happening and had the courage to document it. Mr. Miller, you were the conscience I had lost. You saw injustice and decided to act. Marina, you were the voice of justice. You brought the legal tools to right what was wrong. Lucas, you were the proof that even the youngest among us can be heroes when they decide to do what's right." Robert turned to his mother, his eyes misty. "And Mom, you were and continue to be the strongest person I know. You survived. You rebuilt yourself. You transformed your pain into purpose. I love you more than words can express. And I promise once again that I will never leave you alone again." Everyone toasted, their glasses clinking in the festive air. Eleanor looked around the room at the people who had become her chosen family and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. After dinner, Lucas asked to show his grandmother something. He went up to his room and came back with a wrapped frame. With teenage embarrassment, he handed the gift to Eleanor. "I made this for you, Grandma. I hope you like it." Eleanor unwrapped it carefully. It was a hand-painted portrait, her smiling in the garden surrounded by roses. Lucas had captured not just her physical features, but the essence of who Eleanor was now. Strength, peace, dignity, rebirth. Eleanor couldn't speak. She just hugged her grandson and cried tears of joy. Lucas hugged her back, whispering, "I love you, Grandma, and I'll always protect you. Always." The new year arrived, bringing promises of renewal. Eleanor made her resolutions silently. To continue teaching sewing, to continue sharing her story, to continue living, not just surviving. And maybe, just maybe, to write a book about her journey. Marina had suggested it, saying her story could inspire even more people if it were in a book. Robert made his, to be present, always. No matter how much work demanded, family would come first. And he was already keeping his promise. He had turned down a promotion that would have required him to travel even more. He preferred to stay where he was, with more controlled hours, able to have lunch at home every day. Lucas made his, to be the kind of man his grandmother deserved to have by her side, respectful, attentive, brave. And he was learning. He helped with chores around the house. He spent quality time with his grandmother. He stood up for the weaker kids at school when he saw injustice. In February, Eleanor received an unexpected invitation. A university wanted her to give a lecture on resilience and overcoming adversity to social work students. Eleanor was nervous. She had never spoken to such a large audience, but Robert encouraged her. "Mom, you have a powerful story. These students are going to work with vulnerable people. They need to hear from someone who has lived through vulnerability and overcome it. You can make a difference in their lives." Eleanor accepted. On the day of the lecture, her hands were trembling as she walked onto the stage. There were 200 students in the audience, all looking at her with expectation. But when she started speaking, the words flowed naturally. She told her story without filters. The poverty, the struggle, the hope, the suffering, the silence, the liberation, the healing. When she finished, the audience was silent for a few seconds. Then, a standing ovation. 200 young people applauding, many with tears in their eyes. During the Q&A session, a student raised her hand and asked, "Eleanor, how did you find the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost?" Eleanor thought for a moment before answering. I found strength by remembering who I was before all of this started. I was a woman who raised a son alone, a woman who worked until her fingers bled, a woman who never gave up. And I realized that strong woman was still inside me. I just needed to find her again. And when I did, I realized that no one, ever, could destroy who I really am. The university recorded the lecture and posted it online. In 1 week, it had 500,000 views. In 2 weeks, 1 million. People from all over the country, and even from other countries, watched and commented. Thank you for sharing your story. You gave me the courage to speak about my own suffering. I'm going to use your example, or in my thesis on the rights of the elderly. Eleanor was unintentionally becoming an important voice in the fight for the rights of the elderly in America, and she embraced this role with humility, but also with determination. If her pain could help others avoid the same pain, then it was worth sharing. And so life in the Upper East Side mansion continued. But it was a completely different life than it had been. The walls no longer echoed with oppressive silence. They echoed with laughter, with conversations, with music, with life. One afternoon in March, almost a year after Patricia's departure, Eleanor was in the garden watering the roses when Robert came home from work early. He watched her for a moment, his mother working peacefully among the flowers, her face serene, a slight smile on her lips. She was wearing the straw hat he had bought to protect her from the sun. Her clothes were simple but comfortable, and on her face there was a peace that only comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be. "Mum, can I ask you a question?" Eleanor turned, shutting off the hose. "Of course, son, what is it?" "Are you happy now?" Eleanor thought for a moment before answering. "You know, son, for a long time I thought happiness was the absence of problems. It was having everything perfect, everything in its place. But I've learned that happiness is having peace. It's being able to sleep soundly at night. It's waking up without fear. It's being able to make choices. And yes, I am happy, happier than I ever imagined I could be." Robert hugged his mother there in the middle of the garden. "Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth. Thank you for giving me the chance to fix my mistakes. Thank you for staying." Eleanor held her son tightly. "I will always stay, son. But now I stay because I want to, not because I have no other choice. And that difference makes all the sense in the world." The two stood there, embraced among the roses that Eleanor tended with such care, as the March sun began to set on the New York horizon. It was a simple moment, but perfect. It was a moment of peace, of love, of family. That night, when everyone else was asleep, Eleanor sat alone in the garden. She looked up at the starry New York sky, rare and beautiful on that cloudless night, and she said a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for life, for overcoming, for family, for a second chance. She thought of all the Eleanors still trapped in their silences, of all the elderly people being mistreated, exploited, forgotten, and she vowed to herself that she would keep speaking, keep fighting, keep being a voice for those who hadn't yet found the courage to speak, because Eleanor had learned the most important lesson of all. Shared pain is diminished pain, and shared overcoming is multiplied overcoming. Her story was not just hers, it belonged to everyone who had suffered, and it would be the inspiration for everyone who would yet overcome. And in that mansion that was once a prison and was now a refuge, in that garden that was once a scene of suffering and was now a garden of healing, in that home that was once broken and was now restored, life went on. Better, lighter, truer. Eleanor had survived. More than that, she had thrived. Her body still bore the marks of suffering, but her soul was whole. Her spirit was strong. Her voice was firm. The burning silence had turned into a cry of freedom. The pain had turned into wisdom. The suffering had turned into purpose. And when Eleanor looked back at the path she had traveled, she no longer saw just pain. She also saw the proof of her strength. She saw the evidence of her resilience. She saw the confirmation that she had always been, and always would be, a survivor. Because Eleanor was not just the woman who had suffered. She was the woman who had fought, the woman who had resisted, the woman who had won. And her victory was not just hers. It belonged to all the silenced Eleanors of the world. It was proof that it is possible to start over. It is possible to heal. It is possible to live again. And in that garden, bathed in the golden light of dusk, with her son by her side and her whole life still ahead of her, Eleanor finally understood the deepest truth of all. She had been set free, not when Patricia left, but when she herself decided to speak. Freedom didn't come from the outside. It came from within. From the courage to break the silence, from the decision that she was worth it, from the certainty that she deserved dignity. And that freedom, won with tears and pain but also with courage and love, was hers forever. No one could take it away anymore. No one could diminish it. Eleanor was free, Eleanor was whole, Eleanor was alive, and it was more than enough. It was everything. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor, Robert, and Lucas has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of suffering, courage, and redemption, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Eleanor taught us that silence never protects, that the truth always sets you free, and that it's never too late to start over. Every day, we bring you intense and real stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and reminding us of the transformative power of true love. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life.